You good?
Mm-hmm.
Hey, good morning. This is being done on Wednesday prior to the Thursday of Thanksgiving, November 24th. So uh, I'm going to try to be in the place and in the moment so it's as if I'm talking to you on Thursday morning, because that's when this is going to get released. So, and we're off. Hi, I'm Michael P. Hamons. I'm here to talk to you all about law and society, lots of society. We're here at WCCF News Radio 1580 on the AM dial, 100.9 on the FM dial. We're out across the World Wide Web on an iHeart platform, WCCFAM.com. And we're going to try to be uploaded to a YouTube channel so that we can post this on Facebook and celebrate Thanksgiving together. Hey, however you got here, thanks for being here. We're listened to from Alaska to Taiwan to Hawaii. Hey, Birdie is Pappy. I love you, and I love that brother of yours, Hanker. He's a bazooka, that boy. We're listened to in Mexico and Scotland, in throughout these United States, from down Maine all the way down to North Carolina, Raleigh, High Point, Dr. Sam Kirby and his family, to Asheville, North Carolina, with Craig Econopoli and his family, Carson and Sandusky Paris and their family, Judy Huber and Dave Riley. Dave's not. Dave's having a rough time, and send your love to Dave Riley, part of the Guitar Army, part of a loving family of musicians, part of the early part of the Neo-Beatnik Revolutionary Ensemble that became the Punta Gorda Guitar Army. There in Asheville, we have Carson, who is a daughter of Lloyd Dellinger. Carson, heiress of his love, and also of Carolina Cajun. It's not a hot sauce, but it's a blend of love from the Piedmont, and it's good on most everything. It's so good on chicken that there's a guarantee. What's that guarantee, Zane?
To get a better piece of chicken, you gotta be a rooster.
That's right. So ride that rooster on down through Florida, through with Elton and his clan there, and Kathleen, down to our local listening area from Arcadia to Boca Grande, Venice to Estero, and all the points in between. As I say, however you got here, thanks for being here. Well, so who are we? You know, this is when we celebrate, when we get together. When I say we are doing something, that's sometimes it's that royal we that I'm including everybody, and sometimes it's smaller units of family. But so, who are we? Let's think about that on this Thanksgiving. Where did we come from? Where are we going? Why? Do we care about others? Do we care for one another? You know, it's an opportunity. We ought to be grateful for that opportunity. Give thanks. Give thanks for the burdens as well as the glories. Let's be mindful. So, who are we and where did we come from? Well, that's a bigger, longer question. Let's jump into the middle of it. Let's talk about here in these United States, where did we come from? Well, there's a lot of indigenous people that came to this land, probably across the Bering Strait, different waves of immigration that came from the north down all the way to the south end of South America, probably ricocheted back up into the Caribbean and the rest of continental North America. So, and that's the way it was for a long time. You know, some incursions of some Norse folks into the great north. And then finally, we have this voyage of discovery of Christopher Columbus. Christopher Columbus. Well, he set out thinking that he was going to have a shot across the Atlantic to Japan and China and India. And so he thought that's where he was going. He didn't realize that there was a continent in between. And so he's on this voyage. Well, he did it for all kinds of announced purposes, primarily to raise funds in order to continue crusades, to retake Jerusalem. The Moors had just been kicked out of Spain. There had been huge attacks, continuous systematic attacks on Jews, on folks who didn't have Christian faith. And so there was this Christian forced domination across the world that they believed that they were doing God's work when they were doing it. And they were getting rich while doing it. And so there's this thing of not just adventure and for the good cause, but also for their own glory. And so when Columbus got to these islands that he ran into, what we now know is the Indies, our West Indies, the stories that he and explanations, he started gathering this narrative of this beautiful land that was available to be used and taken for the glory of the sovereigns of Spain and for the glory of the Christian God. And so he's left from Cuba, and he's just now getting to Cuba. He's bouncing around some of these islands, and so on the 24th of November in 1492, he said, "I sailed all night and up until 9 o'clock this morning, when I made landfall at the low island at the same place I had been last week when I was on my way to the island of Babaque. At that time I did not dare to approach the coast because the sea broke heavily in that bay surrounded by mountains. Finally I arrived at the Mar de Nuestra Senora, where there are many islands, and entered the harbor near the mouth of the entrance to the islands. If I had known about the harbor before and had not occupied myself with seeing the islands of the Mar de Nuestra Senora, it would not have been necessary to turn around, although I considered it a time well spent in having seen the islands. Upon arriving, I sent the small boat to survey the harbor and found it to be a very good one, 6 fathoms deep and sometimes 20, near clear and with sandy bottom. I entered and returned the prow to the southwest and then to the west, leaving the low island to the north. These islands are at the base of a great mountain that runs lengthwise from east to west, and is exceedingly long, higher and longer than any of the other mountains on the coast. And there is an infinite number. A rocky reef extends outside and alongside the said mountain like a bar, reaching as far as the entrance. All this on the southeastern part. On the side of the low island there is also another reef. Although it's small, between the two there's a great width and great depth. There's a beautiful river that flows into it. And so it says, I took a small boat before sunrise and went to see a cape to the southeast of the low island, a distance of about 4 miles, because it appeared to me that there ought to be a good river there, glittering like gold as the river fell out as its mouth near the sea. Gold was found. It appeared to me there must certainly be gold here, and I ordered certain those stones be gathered for the sovereign. And while we were at this place, the ship boys cried out that they saw pines, and I looked toward the mountains and saw them, so large and wonderful that I cannot exaggerate their height and straightness, like spindles, both thick ones and slender ones. I knew that ships could be made from these, and there's a great quantity of timber and masts for the largest vessels of Spain. I saw oak trees and arbutus and a good river and the materials necessary for sawmills. The land and the air were more temperate than before because of the height and the beauty of the mountain ranges. Along the beach, I saw many stones of the color of iron, and others which some said were the silver mines carried down by the river. Here I had cut a lateen yard and a mizzen mast for the caravel Nina, and I went to the mouth of the river, and at the foot of the cape on the southeast side I entered a bay which was very large and deep, which could contain 100 ships without lines or anchors. Eyes have never seen such a harbor. The mountain ranges are very high, from which many fine streams descend. All the ranges are covered with pines, and everywhere there are the most varied and beautiful groves of trees. There are also 2 or 3 other rivers lying behind me. I just cannot express to you, my sovereigns, what a joy and pleasure it is to see all this, especially the pines, because there could be built here as many ships as desired, simply by bringing the necessary implements, except the wood and fish, of which there is enormous quantities. I've not praised it 100th part of what it deserves, and it pleases our Lord to continually show me something better, for always in what I have discovered up to the present, it has been a matter of going from good to better, as well as the trees and forests and the grasses and the fruits and the flowers, as in the people, and always in a different manner, first in one place and then in another. The same is true with regard to the harbor and waters. When one who has seen all of this wonders at it so greatly, how much more wonderful will it be to those who merely hear of it, and no one will be able to believe all of it until he sees it. Wow, what a picture of a paradise that he's found, and he's going to bring this story back to Europe. Well, he's bringing it back to the Europeans, but the story of his contact also passes to the indigenous people, and so that when the Spaniards get to Florida, La Florida, they find Indians that aren't as happy to see them as those first that were found. When Juan Ponce de Leon encountered the Calusa Indians in southwest Florida in 1513, he was not hospitably received. The Calusa already knew that Spaniards had enslaved and murdered Caribbean Indians because they had allowed refugees from the Cuba to settle in South Florida. The Calusa continued to resist European domination for nearly 200 years, but in the early 1700s, they finally lost their hold on their ancient homeland. The Indian people of South Florida probably learned about Columbus' 1492 landing in the Caribbean and had first-hand knowledge of Spanish merchants or slavers by 1511. They also knew that Spanish invaders had devastated the Indian population of Cuba. I'm reading from The Calusa and Their Legacy, South Florida People and Their Environments by Darcy A. McMahon and William H. Marquardt. Ponce de Leon's 3 ships first landed in the east coast of Florida in the spring of 1513. By late May, his ships were in southwest Florida waters. The Spanish skirted Cayo Costa, North Captiva, and the Sanibel Islands to the mouth of the Caloosahatchee at San Carlos Bay, where they decided to careen one of their vessels. Over the course of the next 10 days, several parties of Indians approached in canoes, offering to trade. On June 4th, another canoe arrived, carrying an Indian who understood Spanish. He may have been one of the group of Cuban refugees who had fled the Spanish conquest after 1511. This man carried a message from the Calusa leader for the Spaniards to wait for his arrival, but soon the Spaniards were attacked by warriors in 20 Calusa canoes. The Calusa were repulsed, and some were killed and captured. Spaniards sent 2 captives to the Calusa leader with a message. The following day, as one of the vessels was sounding the depths of a port, a larger force of men in 80 shielded canoes attacked the Spaniards. The skirmish lasted until dark, and both sides retreated without damage. The Spaniards remained until June 14th, when they set sail southward on the way back to Puerto Rico. Ponce de Leon and his associates did not return to Florida immediately. The ships of Francisco Hernandez de Cordova stopped briefly on the southwest Florida coast in 1517 and were attacked. The Spaniards killed 23 native people. In 1521, Ponce de Leon again reached southwest Florida, intending to build a settlement. His settlers were attacked, and many were wounded, including Ponce de Leon himself. His wound proved fatal. Spanish encounters in western Florida continued. In 1528, the Panfilo de Narvaez expedition landed in the Tampa Bay area, well north of Charlotte Harbor, encountering many native groups during a long series of misadventures. In 1539, Hernando de Soto's complement of soldiers, horses, and pigs landed on the Florida west coast just north of Colusa territory and made its way to present-day North Florida, murdering and pillaging along the way. Certainly, the Colusa learned of the expeditions of Narvaez and de Soto. When some Dominican missionaries briefly visited the central Gulf Coast in 1549, they encountered hostility. Shipwrecks in the 1540s and 1550s brought the Colusa Spanish goods and captives, including a boy, Hernando de Escalante Fontaneda. Fontaneda lived among the Colusa for 17 years and played a pivotal role in the encounters between Spanish Governor Pedro Mendez de Aviles and Colusa leader Carlos in 1566 and 1567. Having driven the French from St. Augustine in the fall of 1565, Menendez turned his attention to the remainder of the peninsula. The first sustained contact between the Colusa and Spaniards began in February 1566. The Colusa leader, Carlos, met Spanish Governor Menendez in an immense house, and the two leaders reached an alliance, but it did not last. Menendez established several forts across South Florida, including one at the Colusa capital on Mound Key. A Jesuit missionary was stationed there to try to convert the Colusa to Catholicism. When relations deteriorated, Spanish soldiers killed two successive Colusa leaders and many nobles. Throughout this turbulent time, the Colusa remained true to their own spiritual beliefs. The mission of San Anton de Carlos failed and was abandoned in 1569. Documents written as a result of the first intensive European and Colusa contact from 1566 to 1569 say that the Colusa leader's domain included at least 50 towns and that he collected tribute from many more. The Colusa were at war with the Tocobaga, who lived at present-day Tampa Bay, but the Colusa exerted control over most of the rest of South Florida. By 1612, the Colusa leader directly controlled over 60 towns and many more paid him tribute. In 1614, the Colusa waged war against Spanish-allied Indian people at the modern Tampa Bay, and Spaniards retaliated. As far as we know, Spaniards did not return to southwest Florida until late 1600s. The Colusa had apparently decided to isolate themselves from Europeans, although they still held some European captives. In 1680, Florida Governor Pablo de Ita Salazar sent a Spanish soldier interpreter with a party of Timucuan Indians to try to ransom some Spanish captives held by the Colusa. The group traveled from St. Augustine across northern Florida and then down the Gulf Coast toward Colusa territory. Local Indian people begged the expedition to turn back for fear that the Colusa leader would have them executed if he learned that they had allowed the Spanish expedition to pass. The Indian guides finally fled, and the expedition turned back to St. Augustine. This account suggests that as of 1680, the Colusa not only were still in control of their traditional lands, but also were avoiding the hostilities between the Spanish and English that were steadily eroding Spanish control of the northern Florida. Indeed, the Colusa still lived in their coastal towns as late as 1697, when Franciscan missionaries from Cuba attempted to establish another mission. The Franciscans stayed only a few months, driven out when they insisted that the Colusa give up their rituals and beliefs. War broke out in 1702 between England and the allied powers of France and Spain. The English occupied St. Augustine and attacked Spanish garrisons and outposts in the vicinity. In 1704, the English and their Creek Indian allies overwhelmed Spanish and Appalachee Indian defenses in northwestern Florida, destroying the line of Spanish missions and garrisons that stretched from St. Augustine to Tallahassee. About 1,000 Appalachee Indians were taken to the Carolinas to be enslaved. One result of this destruction of the Spanish settlements was the Indian people who had been displaced from their own territories began to move into the abandoned lands. Another result was that armed Uchese Creek and Yamasee Indians moved further into the Florida Peninsula, capturing South Florida Indian people for sale as slaves in the English colonies. The Creeks and the Yamasees had been displaced by raiding, colonization, and wars of the English and Spanish, and had become professional slavers. The English traded muskets for Indian slaves, so the Creeks and the Yamasees were well armed. Having isolated themselves from the Europeans in the 1600s, the Colusa and other South Florida people had no such weapons and were no match for the invading slave hunters. Within a few years after 1704, the remaining Calusa had not succumbed to European diseases, warfare, or enslavement, had been driven from their traditional lands and waters, and some concentrated around St. Augustine, others east and south of the Everglades. Yamasees and Creeks continued to hunt native South Florida Indian people in the Keys in attempts to enslave them for sale to the English. Among these Keys residents were the remnants of several South Florida tribes, including the Calusa. In 1711, the Calusa paramount leader led 270 Indian people to Cuba, and others followed later. Some 1,700 South Florida Indian people could not go to Cuba because there was no more room on the ship. Of the 270 who went to Havana with the Spaniards, over 200 died quickly from diseases, including 4 of the hereditary leaders, among them the Calusa leader. This was really the end of the Calusa, and they were driven out, but not just by the Spaniards, but by other Indians. And so the Indians that were part of all this, instead of structure and tradition that they had, what became ascendant in their society were warriors rather than peacemakers, and it had quite an effect. Well, so who are we, and where do we come from? Remember, the story that starts this Thanksgiving tale is set in New England, and so there was the Plymouth plantation. While the London Company was starting the colonization of Jamestown, and I'm reading now from Richard Current and Harry Williams and Frank Friedel's American History, a Survey, 4th edition, Volume 1 to 1877. When the London Company, from England, there were corporations and businesses that were set up, and they were given incentive to own and make productive land in this new world. And so the London Company was one. While the London Company was starting the colonization of Jamestown, the Plymouth Company attempted to found a colony far in the north at the mouth of the Kennebec River on the coast of what is now Maine. But in a year, the surviving colonists returned to England. The Plymouth Company made no further effort to colonize. The most it did was to send Captain John Smith, after his return from Jamestown, to look over its territory. He drew a map of the area, wrote an enthusiastic pamphlet about it, and named it New England. Eventually, the Plymouth merchants reorganized as the Council for New England, and with a new sea-to-sea land grant from the king, proceeded to deal in real estate on a tremendous scale. The first enduring settlement in New England, the second in English America, resulted from the discontent of a congregation of Puritan separatists. From time to time, separatists have been imprisoned and even executed for persisting in their defiance of the government and the Church of England. A band of them in the hamlet of Scrooby looked to Holland as a country where they might worship as they pleased, though it was against the law to leave the realm without the king's consent. Slipping away a few at a time, members of the Scrooby congregation crossed the English Channel and began their lives anew in Holland. Here they were allowed to meet and hold their services without interference, but as aliens they were not allowed to join the Dutch guilds of craftsmen, and so they had to work long and hard in unskilled and poorly paid jobs. They were further troubled as their children began to speak Dutch, marry into Dutch families, and lose their Englishness. Some of the Puritans decided to move again, this time across the Atlantic, where they might find opportunity for happier living and also for spreading the gospel of the kingdom of Christ in those remote parts of the world. Leaders of this group got permission from the London Company to settle as an independent community with land of its own in Virginia. They tried and failed to get from James I a guarantee of religious freedom, but they were assured that he would not molest them provided they carried themselves peaceably. This was a historic concession on the part of the king, for it opened English America to settlement by dissenting Protestants. The next step was to arrange financing for the voyage. Several English merchants agreed to advance the necessary funds on the condition that the communal plan like that at Jamestown be put into effect, with the merchants to share the profits at the end of 7 years. The migrating Puritans knew they were pilgrims when they left Holland. Their leader and historian William Bradford later wrote, "The sailing from Plymouth was delayed, and it was not until September that the Mayflower, with 35 saints," that's Puritan separatists, "and 67 strangers aboard, finally put out to sea. Their destination was probably the mouth of the Hudson River in the northeast corner of the London Company's Virginia Grant, but when they sighted Cape Cod in November, it was too late in the year to go on. And after reconnoitering, they chose a site in the area that John Smith had labeled Plymouth on his map. Since this lay outside the London Company's territory, they would be without a government once ashore, and some of the strangers began to show a lawless spirit. One of the saints, therefore, drew up an agreement, which 41 of the passengers signed. This Mayflower Compact was like the church covenant by which the separatists formed congregations, except that it set up a civil government and it professed allegiance to the king. Mayflower Compact. In the name of God, Amen. We whose names are underwritten, the loyal subjects of our dread sovereign Lord King James, by the grace of God of Great Britain, France, and Ireland, King, defender of the faith, etc., having undertaken for the glory of God and the advancement of the Christian faith and the honor of our king and country, a voyage to plant the first colony in the northern parts of Virginia, do by these presents solemnly and mutually in the presence of God and by one another covenant and combine ourselves together into a civil body politic for our better ordering and preservation and furtherance of the ends aforesaid, and by virtue hereof do enact, constitute, and frame such just and equal laws, ordinances, acts, constitutions, and offices from time to time as shall be thought most meet and convenient for the general good of the colony, unto which we promise all due submission and obedience." And so, December 21, 1620, the Pilgrims landed at Plymouth Rock. Here they settled and cleared land that had been an Indian village until several years earlier. An epidemic swept the place. During the first winter, half of the colonists perished from scurvy and exposure, but the rest managed to put the colony on its feet. Among the neighboring Indians, whose military power had been weakened by the recent plague, the Pilgrims discovered friends, Squanto, Samoset, Massasoit, who showed them how to obtain seafood and cultivate corn. After the first harvest, the settlers invited the Indians to join them in an October festival, the original Thanksgiving. They could not aspire to rich farms on the sandy and marshy soil, but they soon developed a profitable trade in fish and furs, and from time to time, new colonists arrived from England, and in a decade, the population reached the modest total of 300. The people of Plymouth Plantation elected their own governor, and they chose the great-hearted William Bradford again and again. And as early as 1621, he cleared their land title with a patent from the Council for England, but he never succeeded in an effort to secure a royal charter giving them indisputable rights of government. Terminating the communal labor plan ahead of schedule, the governor distributed land amongst the families, thus making all hands very industrious. He and a group of fellow undertakers assumed the colony's debt to its financiers in England, and with earnings from the fur trade finally paid it off, even though the financiers had not lived up to their agreement to keep on sending supplies. The Pilgrims remained poor. As late as the 1640s, they only had one plow among them, yet they clung to the belief that God had put them in the New World for a reason. Governor Bradford wrote in retrospect, "As one small candle may light 1,000, so the light here kindled hath shone to many, yea, in some sort to our whole nation." Well, so the Pilgrims, and they were outnumbered by people who were not pilgrims with them. They were the strangers who were there. So, who are we? Where did we come from? By the time we get to from 1700 to 1776, we have people coming. The 17th century colonists remained essentially transplanted Englishmen, though even the first arrivals had begun to depart from many of their accustomed ways. As new generations grew up in America, they developed a more and more distinctive character. In the course of the 18th century, they became provincial Americans, a term that had been applied to them even before 1700, but did not come into general use until after 1750. Well, so at first there's in England there's overpopulation and problems that are going on, and so they're pushing people off and letting people come to the English colonies, but then as the Industrial Revolution gets cranked up, they don't have this need to be done with people, and as a matter of fact, it changed the labor supply issues, and so they started prohibiting people from leaving. The government tried to check the loss of English manpower by prohibiting the departure of skilled artisans while continuing to unload the unemployable or the undesirable upon the colonies. And so then the population growth then started to come from France, Germany, Switzerland, Ireland, and Scotland. Well, of course, there had been indentured servants that were being sent in order to they pay for their passage by giving years of servitude. But in Virginia and Maryland, white servitude was being replaced by Negro slavery, which had advantages for the master. It gave him a constant labor supply and practically complete control over it. Identifiable by their color, black slaves could not run away and merge themselves with the mass of free humanity as white servants could. Nor could slaves rise out of their bondage to compete with their masters for wealth and political influence as the servants sometimes did. Moreover, considering the length of their service, slaves were cheaper, especially with the fall of slave prices after 1697, when the monopoly of the Royal African Company was broken and the slave trade was open to English and colonial merchants on a competitive basis. Yep. As of 1763, there were about 230,000 Negroes in all the colonies, and most of them slaves. About 16,000 lived in New England, and 29,000 in the middle colonies, and the rest in the South. By 1775, nearly half the people of Virginia and more than 2/3 of those of South Carolina were black. So, besides the Africans and non-English people, immigration, as we said, from England fell off, and then so we started getting these other parts of Europe being more strongly represented. Of these immigrants, the earliest, though not the most numerous, were the French Calvinists or Huguenots. Under the Edict of Nantes in 1598, they had enjoyed liberties and privileges that enabled them to constitute practically a state within the state in Roman Catholic France. In 1685, that edict was revoked, and so they ended up leaving, going elsewhere. So in America, they settled in the towns along the coast from Charleston to Boston to become the ancestors of Americans like Paul Revere was a Huguenot. Like the French Protestants, many German Protestants suffered from arbitrary enactments of their rulers. The German Catholics, as well as Protestants, suffered even more from the devastating wars of the Sun King of France. And the Rhineland of southwestern Germany, the area known as the Palatinate, was especially exposed to the slaughter of its people and the ruin of its farms. And for the Palatine Germans, the unusual cold winter of 1708-1709 came as the last straw, and more than 12,000 of them sought refuge in England. The Catholics among them were shipped back to Germany, and the rest were resettled in England, Ireland, and the colonies. So some of these the Palatine Germans ended up first in the Mohawk Valley, and then made their way to Pennsylvania, where they received a hearty welcome. After that, the Quaker colony was the usual destination of Germans. Germans comprised the largest body of the 18th century white immigrants, except for the Scotch Irish. The Scotch Irish, those were most numerous of the newcomers, were not Irishmen at all, though coming from Ireland. They were distinct from the Scots who came to America directly from Scotland. You see, in the early 1600s, King James I, to further the conquest of Ireland, had seen to the peopling of the northern country of Ulster with his subjects from the Scottish lowlands, who, as good Presbyterians, might be relied upon to hold their ground against the Irish Catholics. These Ulster colonists, the Scotch-Irish, eventually prospered despite the handicap of a barren soil and necessity of border fighting with the Irish tribesmen. Then, after about a century, the English government destroyed their prosperity by prohibiting the export of their woolens and their products, and at the same time threatened their religion. So, understandably, a cantankerous and troublesome lot, these people were often coldly received at the colonial ports, and most of them pushed to the edge of the American wilderness, where they occupied the land with scant regard for ownership, believing that it was against the laws of God and nature that so much land should be idle, while so many Christians wanted it to labor on and to raise bread. There also they fought the Indians as earlier they had fought the Irish. Among their illustrious descendants was the characteristically Scotch-Irish Andrew Jackson. Scots and Irish, as immigrants to America, had no connection with the Scotch-Irish. Scottish Highlanders, some of them Roman Catholics frustrated in the rebellions of 1750 and 1745, went with their tartans and kilts and bagpipes to more than one of the colonies, but mostly to North Carolina. The Scots, the Lowlanders, and the Highlanders alike, with few exceptions, became loyalists after the outbreak of the Revolution. The Scotch-Irish were patriots almost to the man, as were the Irish. In 1700, the colonial population totaled 250,000 or less. By 1775, it was nearly 10 times as large, more than 2 million. The number practically doubled every 25 years, as Benjamin Franklin observed, leading the English clergyman Thomas Malthus to his pessimistic conclusion in 1798 that any population, if unchecked, would increase in a geometrical progression, while the means of subsistence, except in a new and favored country like America, could not be increased nearly so fast. Important as the continuing immigration was, the rapid growth of the colonial population was mainly due to natural increase, to the excess of births over deaths. In the colonies, with their abundance of land and opportunity, large families were an asset rather than a liability, and husband and wives heeded the biblical advice, be ye fruitful and multiply. So, yet the proportion of the non-English ancestry increased year by year, and from the 10th in 1700 to a third, including people from Africa in 1760. The most homogeneous and most purely English part of the colonies was New England, while most cosmopolitan part was the middle colonies, above all Pennsylvania. It was a third English, a third German, and a third Scotch-Irish. Many of the Germans continued their native language, which eventually was corrupted into German-English dialect known as Pennsylvania Dutch. In the colonies as a whole, there was a good deal of intermarriage between the different nationalities, and even before the Revolution, thousands of Americans could trace their ancestry to two or more nations of the Old World. Well, Frank Desgin does a great job of telling the history of our local area. And the history of early Thanksgiving celebrations in our area is in the newspaper, the Wednesday, November 23rd, the Daily Sun. How are we doing on time there, Zane? How much time do we
20.
have? About 20 minutes. Good. So I like to amplify Frank's newspaper articles. Unfortunately, not enough people, in my opinion, get the local newspaper, and that's a detriment to us all. I think that that you should keep up with local news and get a newspaper, please. So, good day to all and happy Thanksgiving. Did you know a turkey, although common if you could get one, was not necessarily the centerpiece of early Thanksgiving celebrations in this area? Prayers of thanks and other ceremonies have been around for ages, but Thanksgiving, as we know it, likely had its origins in traditions dating from the English Reformation during the reign of Henry VIII, 1509 to 1547. Days of Thanksgiving were also called following the English victory over the Spanish Armada in 1588. In addition, it's possible that pilgrims were influenced by annual Thanksgiving services held in Leiden, Holland, where they were staying in the early 1600s, celebrating the city's relief from a Spanish siege in 1574. In the United States, Thanksgiving is most often traced to a 1621 feast in Plymouth, Massachusetts, following a productive harvest. However, some strenuously maintain the earliest Thanksgiving service in what is now the United States occurred almost 60 years earlier on September 8, 1565, in Florida's St. Augustine. Although, as President, George Washington proclaimed the first nationwide Thanksgiving celebration on November 26, 1789, the actual celebratory date still varied from state to state until 1863, when Abraham Lincoln proclaimed Thanksgiving to be the last Thursday of November. On December 26, 1941, President Franklin Roosevelt signed a joint resolution of Congress moving Thanksgiving from the last to the fourth Thursday in November. Closer to home, Joyce Hyneman, former Punta Gorda mayor and the country's first volunteer draftee of World War II, was born in Alabama and came to Charlotte County permanently around 1929 to work at his uncle A.C. Frizzell's Murdoch store. When he was 10 years old, his remembrances of an early Thanksgiving included hunting on his uncle's ranch in open woods about where the county administration building now stands to harvest a turkey and numerous quail. Beatrice Cotton's family moved to the Cleveland community just northeast of Punta Gorda from Miami, bringing along 2 pet ducks. Her uncle was Dell Cleveland, who had settled in a town named not for his family, but a former president. He worked for George Brown's Cleveland Marine Steamways as an engine mechanic. Her favorite Thanksgiving recollection concerned the ducks, apparently no longer pets, and how one fell from the roasting pan, but was quickly picked up off the floor before serving. My family has a similar story concerning floor stew, says Frank. Punta Gorda's Esther McCullough, that's who the school marms on the bay is about. Punta Gorda's Esther McCullough, school teacher, dental assistant, and Chamber of Commerce secretary, had fond memories of a particular Thanksgiving, likely in the early 1920s in a grove off US 17 across from the Tower filling station. Until Hurricane Charlie, the tower was located at the corner of Riverside Drive and US 17 just before the highway crosses Shell Creek. On the menu were wild turkeys and a 10-pound bass caught in a nearby lake. In Charlotte Harbor, the Riggs family on Laura Street also enjoyed wild turkey and quail harvested a day earlier, along with collard greens. Lois Peoples, Cole, recalling her first Thanksgiving around 1910, could remember only collard greens. I suspect her fisherman dad had also had oysters on the menu. The family lived just east of Gasparilla Island on Coal Island, now part of the Boca Grande Causeway. In Englewood, L.A. Ainger, former Charlotte County School Board member, whose family homesteaded on a creek which would bear their name in the general area of Holiday Mobile Estates on State Road 776, recalled his dad harvesting a turkey just up the creek when he was a youngster for their 1925 Thanksgiving. In El Jabin, the Simons, Donna, and their circus performer husband, Suicide, enjoyed turkey, duck, oysters, and mullet with friends during a Depression-era Thanksgiving feast. As one can see, it wasn't difficult to put together a good feed in early Charlotte County. You know, we have a tribe that's been meeting together for Thanksgiving for 30 years, and this year, because of the flooding from the Hurricane Ian, we're not going to be able to do it at that location, and so we're going to be at Becky's Garden Shop on Thursday for a Thanksgiving feast, and we're looking forward to that and celebrating one another and giving thanks for the bounty as well as the burdens that we have. So just a little bit of humor here in amongst it all. Number one, I because of my eye, that's why I wasn't on the radio last week. We had a from last year's Thanksgiving, but I was planning to do swamp cabbage, and so because of my eye, I haven't been able to go harvest any, and so we bought some water-packed hearts of palm in cans and bought a case of them, and $32 for the case of and most people would give you $32 not to have to go cut a cabbage. You know, it's that much work. And so going to do a new twist on swamp cabbage for Thanksgiving. So, me stew. This is from Where the Sidewalk Ends. I have nothing to put in my stew. You see, not a bone or a bean or a black-eyed pea. So I'll just climb in the pot to see if I can make a stew out of me. I'll put in some pepper and salt, and I'll sit in the bubbling water. I won't scream a bit. I'll sing while I simmer. I'll smile while I'm stewing. I'll taste myself often to see how I'm doing. I'll stir me around with this big wooden spoon and serve myself up at 1:45. So bring out your stew bowls, your gobblers and snackers. Farewell, and I hope you enjoy me with crackers. Yeah. So who are we? Who are we? Tao Te Ching, number 32. Tao is eternal, one without a second. Simple indeed, yet so subtle that no one can master it. If princes and kings could just hold it, all things would flock to their kingdom. Heaven and earth would rejoice with the dripping of sweet dew. Everyone would live in harmony, not by official decree, but by their own inner goodness. This world is nothing but the glory of Tao, expressed through different names and forms. One who sees the things of this world as being real and self-existent has lost sight of the truth. To him, every word becomes a trap, everything becomes a prison. One who knows the truth that underlies all things lives in this world without danger. To him, every word reflects the universe. Every moment brings enlightenment. Rivers and streams are born of the ocean. All creation is born of Tao. Just as all water flows back to become the ocean, all creation flows back to become Tao. Let's read that again. This is verse 32. Tao is eternal, one without a second. Simple indeed, yet so subtle that no one can master it. If princes and kings could just hold it, all things would flock to their kingdom. Heaven and earth would rejoice with the dripping of sweet dew. Everyone would live in harmony, not by official decree, but by their own inner goodness. This world is nothing but the glory of Tao, expressed through different names and forms. One who sees the things of this world as being real and self-existent has lost sight of the truth. To him, every word becomes a trap. Everything becomes a prison. One who knows the truth that underlies all things lives in this world without danger. To him, every word reflects the universe. Every moment brings enlightenment. Rivers and streams are born of the ocean. All creation is born of Tao. Just as all water flows back to become the ocean, all creation flows back to become Tao. We are all part of God. Couldn't do this show without people that help me, folks like Parks Reese in Montana. Parks and I have been running since our freshman year in college at East Carolina University. We developed and encouraged and nourished a friend group across the ages. We still stay close, talk to each other regularly. Parks is a sponsor of this show. Take a look at his work. It's Parks Reese, Parksreece. Go to his website, go to his Facebook page. You'll take a look at his brilliant paintings, all kinds of different medium that he works in. He handles light and image deftly. His work is informed by environmental, spiritual, political matters, and humor. You'll find humor. I mean, sometimes knee-slapping humor in it. Take a look at his work. Buy some of his artwork. Christmas is coming up. It's a good investment for you. Gene Gorman Auto Sales. You've seen the billboards around if you're around here and the signs. I'd give them away, but my wife won't let me. I'd fix them for free. but my wife won't let me. That's because they're a family-owned and operated business. 26 straight years as Charlotte County's #1 volume independent used car dealer. That's a fact, not opinion. It's got 3 locations to serve everyone. One here in Charlotte Harbor, premier location in downtown Punta Gorda across from the police department, and Gene's Dirt Cheap Cars just south of Acquiesca. Yeah, we don't say Aquí and we don't say Punta Gorda, even though we have a rich history of Spanish, being Spanish here in Florida. But if we know you speak a little Spanish, but you're not from here if you say Aquí and Punta Gorda. So, a word to the wise. Also, Gene has a book out as a memoir about his life from the jungles of Vietnam to mental institutions to the boardrooms of corporate America. And it's a great book for anybody to read that's battling addiction or knows someone that is or has. And they're giving away free oil change and a copy of the memoir, You Had to Be There, to anyone that buys a car or sells a car from Gene Gorman Auto Sales. Mac Martin. Mac Martin is Gulfland Real Estate. It's a United Country affiliate. He's been selling real estate from the coast to the country for 20 years. He's if you need lifestyle property, he's a guy to go to. If you need to buy industrial or commercial property, he's a guy to go to. From the coast to the country, Mac Martin, you can find him, Gulfland Real Estate. Hey, Boca Grande Marina. Boca Grande Marina and beautiful Boca Grande on Gasparilla Island. It's a barrier island on the Gulf of Mexico and between the Gulf of Mexico and Charlotte Harbor Estuarine System. Get there by boat. You go in that south entrance of the Boca Bayou and then turn south into the Yacht Basin. It's redredged to -7 feet. Large vessels can get in there. Dockmaster's office commands the basin to help you tie up safely. Fuel docks open from 8 in the morning to 5 in the evening, 7 days a week, 24 all year round. If the fuel docks open, so is the ship's store. You can get tackle, drinks, ice, sundries, those kinds of things. You can also rent a golf cart and tool around the rest of the island. Make sure you're back. They're not open on Thanksgiving, but as of Friday, the 25th, November 25th, they'll be open back up 11:30 on at Miller's Dockside, and then taking reservations for evening meals in the Eagle Grill. Great menu, fantastic food, friendly, helpful service in a beautiful setting overlooking the marina and Gasparilla Sound. So whether you get there by sea float plane like Captain Mark Futch used to do, or come by boat or car, golf cart, bicycle, run, walk, crawl to Boca Grande Marina, they'll be happy to see you and you'll be happy to be there. Hey, we've got coming up in February, we've got the Share the Love for the Kids home tour, for the love of kids. It's there's a group Beyond Ourselves volunteers hope that you and your families, homes and businesses withstood Hurricane Ian and will be able to make necessary repairs and get back to normal soon. Beyond Ourselves still plans to support our Charlotte County children's charities with the Share the Love of Kids home tour in 2023. With the impact of Ian on so many people's jobs, housing, and normal routines, the organization is seeing an even greater need for their services to assist children of families affected and have repairs made to their facilities. Last year's home tour raised $74,000, which was donated to 8 charities, and we'd like to do that again and more, but we need your help. If possible, you can extending the deadline for getting your check to us until it's past November 15th, but I bet that they'll take your donations. For your convenience, they've enclosed sponsor levels and such as that. So for the February 4th is going to be the Share the Love of Kids home tour. We've got 2 minutes. If you please, sup with me. We've got plenty, have a seat. Round the table, eat and grow. groceries. Pass the butter. Yes, ma'am, I'll have tea. Mama baked biscuits, cooked a fresh mess of greens. Big old pot of rice for gravy. Pass the black-eyed peas, if you please. Bless this food to thy service. Have more gravy, and pass the salt. Save room for jello, sour orange pie, cup of coffee, sit and stay a while. Whose hands till the garden? Who pulls the nets ashore? Tell me, where did food come from? Who owns the store? If you please, amen. Thanks for helping me build the zoo. We'll see you on the radio next week.
And that's a wrap.
How about that, huh?
Yay! Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
Yeah, I didn't get to my Dylan Thomas one. Song, love me, not as the dreaming nurses, my falling lungs, nor the cypress in his age the lass's clay. Love me and lift your mask. Love me not as the girls of heaven, their airy lovers, nor the mermaiden, her salty lovers in the sea. Love me and lift your mask. Love me not as the ruffling pigeon, the tops of trees, nor as the legion of the gulls, the lip of waves. Love me and lift your mask. Love me as loves the mole his darkness, and the timid deer the tigress. Hate and fear be your two loves. Love me and lift your mask. See ya.